Join me as I dive into the world of indoor growing to see if pumping CO2 really boosts your yields to the max. Hi, I'm Chad Westport. I've been involved with cannabis for over 30 years. I'm a graduate of SVC and WSU, where I studied sustainable agriculture and small farm systems. Commercially, I've worked at the largest indoor facility in our state, and I've consulted with our legislatures on the medicinal cannabis program. My background and training give me the experience to easily guide new growers through the home cannabis growing process. It's easier than you think and far more rewarding than unloved, mass-produced, chemically treated commercial cannabis. Enter the woo. Westport University. A hot topic among indoor growers is the use of CO2. Professionals with big grows, they swear by it, claiming that it supercharges their plants' growth, while many home growers are skeptical about the costs and the effort. We often think about the nutrients that we put into the soil as being the primary driver of plant growth, but we often forget that light, water, and CO2 are catalysts for photosynthesis. Without CO2, we would have no photosynthesis and no growth. Supplementing CO2 has been shown to have a positive effect on cannabis growth. By increasing the ability to photosynthesize, plants are able to grow quicker, stronger, and bigger. Having increased yields and faster harvests are the goals shared by many cannabis growers, whether they grow at scale or in a small bedroom closet. Growers will try many techniques to gain these advantages. A common method for supplementing CO2 by the home grow community is the use of mushroom bags, bottled CO2, or dry ice. Other DIY methods like baking soda and vinegar or fermentation using sugar, water, and yeast, they're all kind of common. But the professionals typically use CO2 tanks or burners to cover the much larger areas. There are small CO2 tanks that can be used at the home level, but I would never encourage someone to use a CO2 burner for tent growing. That's just ludicrous. All right. Before I tell you what the desired CO2 ranges are in the different life stages of the plant, let me offer a technical description of exactly how CO2 benefits your plants. The Calvin cycle, sometimes referred to as C3, is a series of biochemical reactions that occur during the light-on phase as a direct result of photosynthesis. Light energy is used to convert water and other compounds into gases such as oxygen and chemicals like ATP and NADPH within the plant. Now, the chemical energy produced from the light reaction is used by the enzyme ribisco for carbon fixation. And chemical energy produced from this reaction converts carbon dioxide and water into carbon compounds that will eventually form glucose, aka sugars. Now, these invisible actions are what form the Calvin cycle, of which CO2 is an essential component. We know that increased CO2 can increase photosynthesis, which will promote increased growth and larger yields. The role that CO2 plays is important, but is it something that home growers need to be supplementing? The benefits of increased CO2 in the grow tent would be wasted if a few other factors weren't met. A few questions that should always be asked from the start is, how good of a grower are you? Because unhealthy plants won't benefit from added CO2. Supplementing a grow tent with CO2 is not something that is going to make a bad grower into a good grower. Plants need to be at optimal health levels, meaning their hydration and nutrition must be at peak performance. Well, another question is, what is your budget? Supplementing CO2 will increase your electricity bill through the need for increased lighting and environmental controls to create the ideal conditions for CO2 uptake. and I'll break this down momentarily. It will also increase your materials costs. Do you have the tools to measure the ppm of your nutrient feed, or a meter to calculate your ppfd, which is the usable light? Those are very important parameters to know when supplementing CO2. The most important question, though, is, are you growing in a sealed environment? To take full advantage of supplemental CO2, light intensity must be increased beyond normal conditions. A byproduct of increasing light intensity is additional heat in the grow tent. And although the additional heat is beneficial for CO2 absorption, cooling equipment may still be required to balance temperatures with the higher light output. Cannabis plants exchange gases and water from the tiny pores on the underside of the leaves called stomata. Now, although CO2 encourages the guard cells to regulate the opening and closing of the stomata, they opt for the closed position. The increased heat, though, in the tent and the increased leaf surface temperature, sometimes referred to as LST, that causes the stomata to remain open so they could take in more CO2 and perform photosynthesis at a higher rate. Open stomata, though, will increase humidity. Because the stomata remain open for longer, the humidity levels will increase in the grow tent through the process of transpiration. A dehumidifier may be needed to maintain this environmental factor in the desired range. Now, supplemental CO2 for cannabis is commonly used throughout the flowering stage. And the flowering stage is when keeping lower humidity in your grow tent is most important. A significant design factor that separates many commercial grows from home cultivation is whether the growing environment is sealed or not. Sealed rooms do not exhaust or intake air. Environmental conditions are controlled within the room, and CO2 is supplemented due to the lack of fresh air coming in the room. Now, grow tents are not considered sealed growing environments. And here's a big one. CO2 supplementation should only take place during the lights on phase. The primary benefit of CO2 is increased photosynthesis. And, well, we should all know, photosynthesis only happens with the lights on. This fact is why products like mushroom bags and other products that release a 24/7 stream of CO2 are partially a waste of your money. You have no control over when or how much CO2 is released. CO2 is 1.5 times heavier than air, so your distribution point of CO2 should be placed above your canopy. And as the CO2 is released above the canopy, it will kind of fall downwards into the plants. So make sure that you're using fans to circulate the air within the grow space, because that helps the CO2 from collecting at the bottom of your tent. And regardless of how you are supplementing CO2, you should always have a way to monitor the levels accurately. Popular sensors in the tents of home growers include the Pulse Pro and products from AC Infinity. These devices offer the ability to track the history of your CO2 levels, but they can also send real-time data about CO2 levels directly to your phone. Claims that seedlings need CO2 are slightly misguided. Seedlings don't do well under very strong lights. And we also know that seedlings and young vegetative plants have small root systems. So suppose the root system is too small and the CO2 too abundant. Well, in that case, it can actually cause a downregulation of photosynthesis, which will negatively affect the plant. Downregulation of photosynthesis is the process of decreased function and production at a cellular level. This can occur in an abundance of CO2 if the root zone is not large enough to store the carbohydrates and sugars produced by photosynthesis. A lack of nitrogen availability in the soil, that can also trigger downregulation in the presence of elevated CO2. As the plant develops a larger root system in the vegetative stage, this is often when CO2 supplementation will start. By the flowering stage of growth, the root system is well developed. The root system can handle the additional transpiration and carbohydrate storage demand from having the higher levels of CO2. The plant, it can also withstand the added light intensity and higher leaf surface temperatures required to maximize the benefits of adding CO2 into your grow. As your CO2 levels increase and the plant creates more energy from photosynthesis, growers will need to adjust their feeding levels. The elevated levels of photosynthesis are going to require more nutrients in the soil for the plants to consume, primarily nitrogen. A lack of plant available nitrogen can negate the benefits of adding CO2. Most growers will reduce the CO2 levels back to a natural level of 400 ppm in the final week or two before harvest, so it's not push it all the way. You back off on it, kind of like nutrients. But here is a chart showing you the recommended levels of CO2 for growing, but also the levels of CO2 that can cause a health risk to humans and pets. Carbon monoxide detectors often don't detect CO2, but there are many CO2 specific detectors available. So if supplementing CO2, I feel it is worth the investment. Be safe. Signs of too much CO2 for the plant include looking weak and yellow, including necrotic and chlorotic leaf spots. It's kind of the brown dead spots, basically what it is. But between 0 and 200, you get no growth. The ambient levels of CO2 is about 400, and seedlings, they can handle 400, so you don't need to supplement. Veg, 600 to 700 ppm, that's where a lot of people run it, and in late veg, 800 to 1200. Now flower is when you're really pushing it. Flower can be 1200 to 1500 ppm of CO2, and then like I said, you reduce it pre-harvest, 800, kind of back down to 400. The maximum you would ever want to hit is 1800. Actually diminishing returns at that point, so don't even go there, because the health hazards start at about 2000 to 5000 ppm. You could get headaches, drowsiness, loss of focus, increased heart rate, and if you're going above 5000, that's a serious risk. So again, have a way to monitor it if you're using it, if you're in the house, if there's pets, all of that, because CO2 is heavier than the air we breathe, and it can be found in higher concentrations lower to the floor. So pets actually stand a higher risk than we do. And to calculate the amount of CO2 needed to raise the ppm of the air to 1000, you need to do some math. It's pretty simple though. So to reach 1000 ppm in a specific area, you want to multiply the length times the width times the height times 0.001. The answer will provide you with the cubic feet of CO2 needed to raise the levels in your grow room to 1000 ppm. And just as a reference point, CO2 is often sold by the pound in tanks, and 1 pound of CO2 equals 8.7 cubic feet. So here is a little cheat sheet for doing the math to calculate the desired CO2 levels in your grow space. So the question is, should you add CO2 to your grow tent? And here's where I feel like I may be a bit of a Debbie Downer. Supplementing a home cannabis grow with CO2 is not something that is going to make a bad grower into a good grower. Again, plants need to be at optimal health levels, meaning their hydration and nutrition must be at peak performance. Lighting needs to be specifically tuned in relation to the elevated levels of CO2, and without tools to measure light intensity or ppm of CO2, home growers are just guessing. As for the cons to the DIY chemical reaction methods that I mentioned earlier, There are a few, but most of the DIY solutions for CO2 generation require daily or hourly maintenance to facilitate constant CO2 output. And the levels created by these methods are often insignificant. Yeah, they're not significant enough to reach your target level, guys. In a sustained matter, in any matter, just they're cute, okay? That's what I say. They're cheap attempts and often fall short, although they are sound in principle. Again, this is where things sound good on paper, but in reality, meh, right? More importantly, if we as home growers are exhausting the entire volume of air inside our grow tents every 1 to 2 minutes, we would be adding CO2 just to pump it immediately out. Sealed room environments are superior because none of the air or the CO2 is removed from the room. All of these reasons are why we see CO2 supplementation used professionally, but not very often in home cannabis cultivation. Boosting the growth rate through the utilization of supplemental CO2 is dependent on the light intensity, the leaf surface temperature, the size of the container, and the maturity of the root zone, as well as the available nutrition in the soil, namely nitrogen. Without them, growth response is limited. I tend to recommend CO2 usage once all of the other variables are dialed in and growers are comfortable in their skills. Personally, I do not supplement CO2, and I have been happy with my results. What has your experience with CO2 supplementation been? Have you tried any of the DIY methods that I mentioned above? How did it go? Let me know down in the comments and help spread the knowledge to the ever-expanding global cannabis community. Together we learn, together we share better herbs. ChadWestport.com is where you can go to find my genetics and collectible merch. Thank you for watching here on the Chad Westport YouTube channel. Please hit the subscribe button if you aren't yet subscribed. New Westport University videos coming up. So thank you for watching today. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And remember to party on!